Welcome. Happy Friday to each of you. We're just giving it a moment for our guests to get settled into our virtual learning space. So excited that you have determined that this is a worthwhile way to spend your hour this morning with us on Friday. We're thrilled. We never take it lightly when folks will join us for our VodCast community. I'm Dr. Nika White. My pronouns are she, her, hers, and I serve as the founder and lead principal consultant for NWC. And on behalf of our team, I want to welcome you to Intentional Conversations VodCast. This is where we intersect conversations of diversity, equity, inclusion, and belonging with leadership in business. And we do it in partnership with wonderful guest co-hosts who are also in this space doing tremendous work. We love to center the voices of other practitioners in this space. And I can't wait for you to meet our guest co-host for today. I just want to welcome you all. I want you to settle in. Let us know in the chat where you're joining the conversation from. We love to see and hear all the geographies that are being represented among this community. I also want to take a moment to acknowledge and welcome all of you who could be joining us by LinkedIn Live. Some of you, that's how you get your content from our VodCast, and we are grateful in any capacity in which you join us. We do happen to think, though, that the virtual experience through Zoom is optimized. And so if you want to join us there, my colleagues are going to drop the link into the chat of LinkedIn Live. And if you want to hop on over here, we'll welcome you. Or stay put, whatever is going to work best for you. We're just glad you're here. Cameras are always encouraged, but certainly never required. We love to see smiling faces, but we also know that many of you join just in auditory capacity to observe, to listen in, and we're just glad you're here nonetheless. I also want you to know that at NWC, we really do value disability inclusion. So for that purpose, we do have closed caption that has been enabled for any of you who may find benefit in having that to optimize your experience being with us today. Welcome, welcome. I'm seeing folks going to the chat, which we appreciate. So if you're just now joining us, we're just sharing where we're joining the conversation from. We know that California is represented today, North Carolina, South Carolina, of course, which is where we are headquartered, but we are 100% remote. Our colleagues are all over because our clients are all over. I see Texas, which is where our guest co-host is from today. So I certainly anticipate a very lively show. We're going to extend the opportunity to each of you to please consider throughout our time together today. Leveraging the chat is going to be a way for us to get proximate to each other and to share resources and affirmations and just other thoughts and sentiments as we all are engaged in today's dialogue. Once again, I'm Dr. Nika White, and I want to welcome you to Intentional Conversations VodCast. Let the conversations begin indeed, and that is precisely what we are going to do at this time. Again, if you're just joining us, this is Intentional Conversations VodCast, where we intersect conversations of DEIB with leadership and business. We love to, at NWC, take a moment at the top of the hour of these convenings just to identify some national observances. And we are recognizing in this month Native American Heritage Month. And so I certainly want to make sure that I amplify that. We often say that while there are certain months where we are all really providing intentionality around really recognizing certain communities and populations, we certainly want to make sure that it doesn't go unnoticed, that we need to be providing support for marginalized communities all throughout the year. They are deserving. We need to make sure those individuals are seen, valued, heard, and appreciated. And so I want to invite you to make sure that you're leaning into that. I also want to invite you to subscribe to the LinkedIn newsletter that we have. Is called Inclusion Insider. This is one of the many ways in which at NWC we like to show up for the broader community, providing support as individuals decide to deepen their knowledge and understanding of the constructs of diversity, equity, and inclusion, belonging, and all the things that fall under that broad umbrella. And so go to LinkedIn if you haven't yet subscribed, and feel free to do so. We'd love to have your commentary and your engagement in some of the content that we're putting out on a consistent basis. Now, I have reached over 11,000 learners for my LinkedIn Learning course #1, which released in June of this year. It is all about individual accountability for equity and inclusion. And I just want to extend a lot of gratitude to each of you. Many of you have taken my course, or maybe you've shared it with others. And I want you to know that I will be back in the recording studio in California with LinkedIn, actually just a couple weeks from now, recording 2 new courses that will be released in Q1 2024. So I wanted to put that into your hearing. Now, we have some great co-hosts coming up for the future weeks of November, and I want to take a moment to let you know who those individuals are. We would love for you to protect the date and time on your calendar and be with us in the community. And so I'm excited because a dear friend, November 10th, Christine Scott, is going to be joining me. And we're going to be discussing an experience as an employee, a business owner, and a Black woman navigating the professional language services space and how the work of DEI intersects and impacts that. And so she is fluent in Spanish, and she serves a lot of different communities and organizations and translation services, and really has learned a lot about how language services is critically important to inclusion. And so I love to have you all join us for that conversation on November 10th. And then following that Friday, on the Friday that's actually November 17th, we have Meenal Bapaya, who's actually going to be joining us. And if you don't know her, she has a new book out, and I can't wait for us to talk about it. But she is a great practitioner in this space. We're going to be talking about power, money, and time as they relate to designing equitable organizations, as well as what she refers to as the racial triangulation between Asian and Black people, and how we can avoid falling into the divide and conquer tactics. And so if you're interested in what all of that means, she's going to unpack it for us, and we look forward to you joining us on November the 17th. If you have a guest co-host that you think would make great value to the type of content and experience that this community has come to appreciate, we would love to hear from you. So please send us some communication. You can do so by contacting my colleague, Amora Carter, and her email is simply amora@nikawhite.com. She is now vetting and booking and reserving guests for Q1 of 2024 and also Q2 of 2024. And so, because we're quickly getting all those slots filled up for Q1. But if you are interested and you want to provide a recommendation, we love to receive those. And so we look forward to hearing from you. Now, if you've been with us for quite some time, you know that before I jump into dialogue and conversation with our guest co-host, I always like to take a moment to read my co-host full bio. That is so important to me because I want you all, as our valued community, to know the accolades, the credentials, the experiences in which our guest co-hosts show up to the conversation with. And so today is going to be no different. So at this time, I want you to turn your attention as I give you a little bit of background on Dr. Mary B. Rice-Boothe. Mary Rice-Boothe has more than 25 years of experience in education as a teacher, a principal coach, curriculum designer, and an equity officer. She currently serves as an executive director of curriculum development and equity at the Leadership Academy, a national nonprofit organization. In this role, she oversees the organization's internal and external equity strategy. She is also the lead designer for the organization's instructional tools and resources. Her book, Leading Within Systems of Inequity in Education, a liberation guide for leaders of color, was published just earlier this year, March of 2023, by ASCD. And for those of you who may not be familiar, that's Association for Supervision and Curriculum Development. And so I want you to find those accolades, find those emojis, whatever it is that you feel is appropriate to help me to welcome Dr. Mary B. Rice-Boothe. And let's just do that at this time so that she knows that we are so appreciative of her time, of what we know is going to be a lot of value that she's going to share to the conversation, and just for being here with us to share information that I know is going to make us better. So welcome, Dr. Mary. I am so glad that you're here. Thank you for accepting our invitation. And I would love to get you to greet this audience in your own way. And one of the things that we often ask our guest co-hosts to do as they're thinking about how they may want to show up for this audience and greet the audience is to consider sharing something that we would not know about you from reading your bio, as I just did, or from even looking at your LinkedIn profile. So this helps us to have a deeper connection to you, get to know you a little bit better, but welcome. So glad you're here.
Yeah, thank you so much for having me. I appreciate it. Good morning, everyone. Happy Friday. I'm very excited to have made it to the end of the week. It's been a long one, which I'm sure for many folks can relate to. And I think by looking at my profile, you probably know that I'm a runner. That's something that I do a lot for my own self-care. Something you definitely I know is not on any type of social media is that I'm a big fan of rom-coms, romantic comedies. Um, And it's funny because I used to, and I still make fun of my mother for like being the Miss Hallmark. She like loves Hallmark, but I feel
Yeah.
like I'm getting to that space as well. And I think probably because being in the space that we're in and doing the work that we're doing, you don't
Yeah.
know the ending, right? Like you don't know how this is going to go. You don't know how, we don't have there's nothing, that bow ties and puts it all together at the time that
Yes.
we're engaging with a client. It's something about romantic comedies. You know how it's going to end, right? You like kind of have, how this is all going to happen. You get to laugh in the middle of it. You get to enjoy, get to see the romance. So yeah, I just love being able to kind of switch off my mind and enjoy a bit of romance and comedy at least once in my week. So.
I love that. That is great. I'm trying to think of some of my favorite because yeah, it's not that I necessarily just that's my genre that I go to, but there are a number of them that I have really enjoyed. Do you have a favorite?
My favorite is probably Love and Basketball. That's an old one
Oh
that
my
people.
gosh, that is such a classic. Yes. Yes. Love and Basketball is definitely a classic. I would have necessarily considered it to be comedy. There were some moments that certainly had a lot of levity to it, but I think it's just a classic. Love and Basketball. Sanaa Lathan and Omar Epps, right?
Yep,
Right?
yep, yep.
Oh yes, no, they're amazing. It's definitely a classic. So if you don't know it, you need to check it out. Love and Basketball.
Exactly. I can watch that on repeat.
Yes, absolutely, absolutely. Okay, great. Well, thank you for sharing that tidbit with us. So, as I shared in your bio, you have over 25 years of experience in various educational roles. And so, I would love for you to take us on a journey of understanding Dr. Mary. What initially drew you to a focus on equity in education? And how has your perspective, now that you've been working in this space for 25 years, evolved?
Yeah. I mean, I think I know that I started in the education space because of equity. So, I was born and raised in Wisconsin, and in my K to 12 experience, I never had a teacher that looked like me. Right. And so I
Mm,
never had and so I remember my 11th grade teacher, American history teacher, introduced me to Zora Neale Hurston. And that was the first time in class that I had a book that was written by a Black woman, had Black characters in it, and it completely like transformed my experience within the school. Like outside of school, I was reading kind of folks, books that were written by Black authors, but never inside of school, right? And so
yeah.
right, it transformed me so much that I named my daughter Zora because it like, impacted me. And so when I graduated, I didn't think I was going to become a teacher. Like I had this whole other trajectory that I was going in. But my mom always knows. She's like, I knew you were going to be a teacher. And so I was drawn to wanting to be able to give a different experience than I had, right? And I knew the impact of when I did finally have a Black teacher in college, how transformational that was to see myself reflected. And so I became a teacher because I wanted to be able to kind of be a part of that diversity within the K to 12 system. And I continue to realize how much and the need for impact, right? So initially I was like, okay, I just want to focus on, I just want to be that reflection. I want to, be able to support my classroom. And then I realized, okay, this is bigger than just my classroom, right? I need to be able to impact more in order for my students to be successful. So then I went into leadership and became a principal. And then I recognized like, okay, this is a systems issue, right? Like it's not something again, right, that I can just manage right within my classroom.
Right.
Right. And so then that's how I really kind of landed into the space of being a systems level leader. And then right from the beginning was always talking about the fact of the need for our Black and Brown students to be successful, to be really kind of cared for and centered. And so when I landed into the equity officer role in 2018, I was like, okay, I finally just got the title to match the job that I was already doing. Right. And so I feel like that was always my trajectory. That was always my focus and why I wanted to be in this role. But just finally had the match between title and the work that I was doing.
No, I love all of that. And you use the word transformational in terms of seeing someone reflected in the identity that you have in that role. It really is transformational. And we hear that across so many different industries and definitely education as well. I think that probably if we were to poll this audience, and in fact, I want to do it right now, especially for those who are part of underrepresented, or I like to say underestimated populations, you probably can recall the name, each of us can, that fit that description of the first teacher that was a non-white teacher, right?
Yep,
And
exactly.
I certainly recall mine. Her name was Mrs. Bobo. Until this day, I can still think back to so many different examples of how my educational experience under her tutelage, under her leadership, was so memorable. It was so impressionable.
Mm-hmm.
And I think that we need to continue to amplify the importance of having educators that are well represented across so many different demographics, because that is critical. And so, did you come from a family of educators, or
I did
no?
not. No, I'm a
Really?
first
Okay.
generation college degree. But I think I go back to the story that my parents were both their families were sharecroppers in Arkansas. So they picked cotton like at starting at age 3 to 5 years old. And so they and they went to school based on the cotton picking season, right? So they only were in school when they couldn't be workers, right? And so for them, education was so critical to recognizing that this was the way out for them, right? So
Yes.
they did everything in their power to ensure that I'm the youngest of four, that all of us we put school first. And so,
Hmm.
yeah, because of that, all four of us have college degrees,
Oh,
and are but that are the first generation of college graduates, first generation of high school graduates and college
oh,
graduates.
yes.
Family,
I
yeah,
love that. And what you're amplifying is that all it takes is kind of one, and then you can bring so many others along with you. And that is how we can create that level of change. If you don't know to have it into your consideration set, it's not going to find its way into being actualized. And so I appreciate all that you're sharing to this conversation. So I want to get into your book baby, as we were
yes,
chatting before we went live.
yeah,
And it's so funny because Dr. Mary and I were talking about the fact that, really it is a book baby, but when we think about sometimes the length of time, it's longer than 9 months. And so,
yes, yes.
mine was, yours probably was as well. And so, but yes, we have book babies. And so congratulations to you on
Thank you.
your release of Leading Within Systems of Inequity in Education, a liberation guide for leaders of color. And I'm sure that you are very intentional about that title, and including the word liberation finding its way into it. And I
Yep,
love that.
yep.
And so I want you to share with us, this goes along with the story I'm sure that you've already started sharing, but what inspired you to write this guide?
Yeah, yeah, exactly. I definitely went back and forth with my publisher on the title, and definitely advocated for that liberation to be part of it. I was like, no, we have to have that word in there. Um, I mean, it does start with kind of that 2018 moment when I became an equity officer in my nonprofit organization. And before then, I led a very traditional kind of path in my career. And in every role, I had lots of books, lots of conferences, lots of kind of guides to how to do that, right? So it's very clear how to become a teacher, how to do that teacher job. It's very clear how to do that principal job, right? But being an equity officer, it was not that clear, right? You just put into this role and be like, can you roll back 400 years of oppression, quick, just
Okay,
real
do
quick.
that. Yeah, go ahead.
Right, exactly, exactly. Can you just make us, an equitable organization just real quick? And so it was the first job that I had that did not have a very clear roadmap, right? And so I was trying to figure that out. And my always the thing that I always go to is like, okay, so somebody must have done this in the past, right? Like I was an English teacher, but I always wanted to be a history teacher. So I'm like, there's got to be something back there in history that is telling me how to do this job. And so, and as well as at the same time that I was becoming in this role, a lot of my peers were also assuming similar roles, right? Across the in the K-12 space as well as in the nonprofit space. So I just started talking to people. I was like, how are you doing this? How are you approaching this? And in these conversations, every single time I left so fulfilled. Like I just like, they just poured into me kind of what they were doing. And then they also was like, well, who else are you talking to? What else is happening? Right. And so it was just this experience that I felt like I can't keep this to myself. Like these conversations are great. I'm really benefiting from them, and I'm hearing that others want to hear from this too. And so that was really kind of the genesis of this book, was just like, how do I ensure that the next group of folks that assume this type of role, and assume this type of or not even that you're just in an equity officer role by title, but you're responsible for changing our system, our K-12 system, and you're living in the skin that we're in, and that intersection is it creates a very unique experience, right? And so how do you ensure that they feel as if they have something to help guide them? And so that was kind of really the genesis and the opportunity to kind of put all these stories together, for people to be able to say. I'm just like, let me get something that I wish I had, right?
Yes,
Be able
yes,
to give back to those folks that are just starting off, or the folks that just like need something to keep them
right.
as well.
Right. Well, I'm so glad that you decided to not gatekeep, right? Sometimes we can keep stuff to ourselves and it can be so useful to others. And I think that's
Yeah.
such a great way to just be an ally and to help to just facilitate more of a collective approach to some of the challenges that we're seeing that are deeply steep within our systems. And so thank you for writing this book. In your book, Dr. Mary, you do talk about leadership competencies for DEI. And I would love for you to just, to the extent in which you feel comfortable, because I know that we want people to go get the book. And by the way, we have shared it into the chat, so we're not going to give you all the things, but I will ask Dr. Mary to share maybe just a few of them that particularly you have found that's resonating really well with your readers.
Yeah. So there are 10 altogether, and they're broken up into kind of three categories. One is just kind of what you need to do individually as a leader of color, right? To be able to thrive within an equitable system. And then there's the interpersonal part. So kind of one, competencies that you do with others. And then there's the kind of the institutional systemic part. So things that you need to do in order to really change the system that you're in. So I'll start off with one that's in the individual that people resonate with a lot, which is practice love and rage. And that's a big one for folks because first of all, folks are like, you're asking me to do emotion.
Yeah.
You know, and I know that for me, when I kept hearing everybody that was talking to kept talking about leading with love. And I was like, I don't do that. Like, I don't do, and remember when I became a principal, I was so worried about being labeled the angry Black woman that like,
Yeah.
it's just like, right? Like I try to like keep that emotion,
Yeah.
you
Exactly.
know,
Hold that in.
right, exactly. And that's how we're taught too, right? Like we're
That's how
taught
we're
that
taught.
exactly like leave the emotions out of this, right? And just do your job. And so I really had to kind of reflect myself about like, was I actually leading? Like what type of emotions was I leading with or not leading with when I was in a leadership role? And again, at my high school that I was a principal of was overage and undercredited students. So we were kind of the last stop
Yeah.
before,
Yeah.
before they kind of got their GED. So I recognized the fact that I actually was leading with love. Like I had to love these kids in order to kind of get them to that finish line. And then I recognized the fact that equally, I was angry and had to be angry with the system that we were in order to actually move to action. Right. And so I couldn't, because a lot of times we get into sometimes we get into a leadership role and we just sit there. right? I'm just like, I'm good. I got to the table. I'm comfortable. Let me just like, keep going. And I had to realize the fact that if I'm not angry about the inequities that are happening within our system, then I can't actually move to action. And so I
Absolutely.
think, yeah, so I think the love and rage one is something that leaders are like always like wonder about, because they're like, that's not how I was raised. You don't do that. Um, but then when we start unpacking it, they really appreciate the fact that like, yeah, actually, I need emotions to get this job done, right? Like
Yes.
I need to tap into my emotions, and love and rage are just two of them, right? But like I need all of that emotion in order to be able to keep going. So that's definitely a big one that folks resonate with. Um, I think the moving to the side of the institutional one, I think one that people struggle with is the one that's like take a stand, right? Especially in our current political climate. A lot of folks are just like, I don't know about that. I have a pension I have to worry about. I have kids to go to get into, pay their tuition, right?
Yes.
They're like, I'm not quite sure if I'm willing to kind of do what you're asking me to do, right?
Yeah.
And I want to always emphasize is that like you're taking a stand is a spectrum, and it's going
Right.
to look different, for you today versus next month, next year, right? And the fact of, I'm not asking everybody to be marching in the streets and to be, have picket signs. That's there for some folks, that's what it looks like for them. But there's
Right.
also, right, but there's also the folks that are in the boardrooms or that are at the
Yeah.
table, right? And they're taking a stand is going to be probably more incremental, right? More kind of like is going to take a longer time. And I think when white supremacy is those two people fighting against each other
Right.
and just letting everything else is just, kind of going on before it, versus like, actually, you know what? I need to actually be in conversation with the person taking the picket stands, right? Being on the streets outside and say, okay, what is your strategy? This is my strategy. How do we work in community together versus fighting against each other?
Absolutely.
Yeah. So I think that's
Yeah.
another one that people kind of have to grapple with and unpack, and see kind of this is where I am at this particular time. Um, and the last one I'll introduce, I skipped over this. I'll go back to the interpersonal one, which is around is creating a coalition. And that I think is essential component to this work, and no matter what industry that you're in, right? So I always struggle with the kind of the Black girl magic idea, because I think that kind of amplifies the fact that we have to be super people. Um,
Mhm.
and we're not, right? We're just regular people, and we don't have to do everything on our own, right? And we should be able to do this in community, and multiple communities are necessary. Multiple coalitions are necessary in order for us to be successful. So the importance of really being strategic and thoughtful about who is in your corner, but making sure that you have folks that are in your corner, and that will have the meeting before the meeting with you in order to be able to kind of get the work done.
That
So
is so rich, and so much is coming up for me. So I just want to take a moment to kind of process what I'm hearing and
yeah.
and comment on what I'm hearing. The first thing is your book is really coming from a place of how to show up from an education sector. But to your point, you've also alluded to this. These are competencies for DEI leaders, and even if people don't have DEI in their title, they're just competencies for leadership in general, no matter what the industry is. And so I
Yeah.
love the fact that this full circle moment is surfacing because I want everybody to get this. There may not be folks that are in the education, sector that's on this call or going to be privy to this with the replay or the podcast, but these are just leadership leadership principles that I think that we all can benefit from. And I love that. I want to talk about love and rage. I think that is just beautiful. As you were describing the importance of, we need to feel our emotions. We need to allow our emotions to come forth, because when we do so, we often find that we can lead with empathy and compassion, but then sometimes that may facilitate a certain response, but then other times that rage and that anger and that just dissatisfaction, and that just, it really speaks to our belief system, right? Our convictional nature. And so that can elicit a different type of response. And sometimes, to your point, we need all of those responses, right, to be
Yeah.
able to drive towards change. And I love that. It's really highlighting the importance of EQ, emotional intelligence,
Yes.
as a leader, and that being a part of a leader's makeup and how in which they show up. I also love that it centers humanity. As humans, we do have all these mixed emotions. And we know that we hear people talk often about leading the work in DEI really requires us to be human-centered, right? I think that we need to get back to that. And so I love that it amplifies that in so many different ways. And so, yeah, and then take a stand. That's very, very relevant to your point of what we're kind of addressing right now. Everybody's way of leaning in and processing and trying to be a part of a solution can look vastly different. We have to respect people's lanes, respect how in which they arrive at what they feel like they're best to do and in what capacity. And then the last one was about interpersonal, doing things in coalition, as this collective unit. I think that we can't say that enough, because no one is going to create significant change of impact that really can sustain itself by doing it in silo. So we need more people, more voices around the importance of coalition. I also found your what you mentioned about Black Girl Magic. I never thought about it in that way. And I do love a really good reframe. But what's interesting about it is, again, the perspective of diversity and how we all can land at and interpret things differently. Every time that I hear Black Girl Magic, I always hear that it always lands on me that whatever you're doing, just know that you are enough, right? And sometimes it does come in the context of people doing what may be perceived as miraculous things, or things that are superhuman. But so I appreciate you opening my mind to the fact of the potential compromise, I guess, that also it can create if we aren't careful to put it into the right context. And so, so thank you so much for that. So I'm going to tell y'all, if you are not convinced that these three principles are worthwhile getting the book, I'm not sure what's going to move you, because I definitely think that this is an appropriate, book for all of us who are looking to just lead in a much more effective way. For all of those that we may find in our sphere of influence. Okay, so I'm going to be shifting in a little bit to take questions from the audience, but I have a few more thoughts that I would love to engage you on, Dr. Mary. So I want to talk about, and we touched on this a little bit, but perhaps there's more you want to say, how although this is for the work of DEI leaders in the K through 12 space, again, as we just mentioned, it is much broader than that. So how have you found the general population of people outside of the education realm engaging with this book? And are people seeing it as, I'm not in that space, but yes, I need to get this book? Because I think that's a really important message that I want to amplify. And I want to give you a chance to kind of talk about it as well.
Yeah, and it is true. And it initially was a little bit surprising, right? So I was very clear about kind of like who's the audience and kind of what's the, the goal. And then I had folks in the nonprofit space, in the for-profit space read it, and they're just like, this is relevant, right? Like we're number one, we all work within inequitable systems, right? Like education system is not the only one, the only system, right? That's inequitable. So like we're all working in these white spaces. And number two, folks that, consider themselves, again, this was a fight with my publisher. I would have liked to call leaders with a global majority, but we went with leaders of color. But if you, whatever phrase you utilize, you understand that friction, right? So, right. You understand the fact of like having to kind of negotiate your way through your work, right? And you recognize the fact of like some days, sometimes you wake up and you're like, I'm doing this. This is great. And some days you're just like, I'm not quite sure if I can do this anymore. Right. And so we are all feeling that. And so I feel like even though the stories that people are sharing. So again, every chapter starts with kind of a profile of a particular leader within the K-12 system, but then also throughout it, I share a lot of different anecdotes. And again, those stories, even though they may be, couched in a K-12 system, people resonate with like, that's been me, right? Like I've been the person that has been experiencing this even in my in my healthcare system or in the nonprofit space or in the corporate space, right? So that even though the environment may be different, the stories stay the same. And I think
Ew.
that's what I want to amplify, is that it definitely there's definitely a lot of crossover there in regards to experiences. And then I really try to make the book as concrete as possible, so I don't just kind of like lay out like these are the problems that we're dealing with, but like under each competencies, I really try to make it like every kind of a set of actions that you can do in order to actually achieve that competency. And so people, that concreteness, I think, is again also transferable to whatever inequitable system that you're in.
Absolutely, that practicality, don't just tell me what, tell me how. Yeah, tell
Right.
me how. That's very much important. So, okay, I'm going to ask another question, but I do want this audience to be aware that I'm going to be turning it over after I ask this last question, to invite you to share in the conversation, and you can do that a number of ways. If you're here live, a part of our Zoom community, you can use the raise hand feature, and that lets me know that you're willing for me to spotlight you and to invite you to unmute yourself and share your comment or question. Or if you want to just go to the chat and share your question, we will present it on your behalf in the allotted time that we have. If you're joining us via LinkedIn Live and you have a question, go to the comment section. My team is watching that closely, and we'll bring it over into the chat here to make sure that we do not leave you out, right? We're glad you are here with us in whatever capacity and where you're joining us from, no matter which platform. So I'll give you time to percolate on that while I go to my next question. So, given the evolving landscape of education, what are some of the pressing challenges that you see, Mary, DEI officers in K through 12 education space currently face, and how are they addressing these hurdles, or how
Yeah.
should they be?
Right.
Yeah.
I mean, I'm in Texas, so and I work with other folks in Texas. I work with folks in Florida, um, you know, uh
Bless you, bless you, bless you.
Tennessee, Iowa.
Yeah.
Yeah. So I think that the biggest hurdle now is that we have even if we didn't have a target in our back before, we have a even bigger target, right? And so we see a lot of folks whose job and roles are being considered, oh, they're illegal. Oh, you're harming our kids, right? Like, so there's unfortunately, I just kind of did a new series of interviews with a couple of folks, and just the level of personal attack that our folks are experiencing is just at an all-time high right now. And
Mhm.
so I think that's the biggest challenge. And what I so appreciate about all these folks is it's not deterring them, though, right? Like they just like,
But
this is my work. I may have to change my title. So my folks
yeah,
that in Florida have all changed their title. None of them have diversity, equity, or inclusion in their titles. Completely different, but they're still doing the work, right? And
do
so
work. Yeah,
I think for them, it's just a matter of like how now they're trying. We don't even have a clear path, right? Or like we don't have a framework, and now we're having to change a framework, right? And kind of how to do this work in a completely different way to keep going despite all of the noise, right? I just call it noise
right.
that they're experiencing. So I think that's the biggest challenge, particularly for and recognizing the fact that our students are still our students, right? And our students are still in need of so many supports and services. And so how do I make sure that I keep centered on my students that I'm working with, just despite everything that's happening. So I think that's the biggest challenge. And unfortunately, some folks have decided that
Yeah,
it's not worth it, right? And so what I always find interesting, though, is that these folks that are leaving, they're not leaving the work, right?
Yeah.
They're not leaving and be like, oh, I'm done with supporting, you're not helping students anymore. I'm not going to do that. But they're just leaving the institution of
Yeah.
the education system, right? So I think it's a huge call to action for our education systems in regards to like, how are you taking a stand, right? Like, how are you ensuring that the work that is so necessary continues despite all the pushing back that we're receiving from our communities, from our state legislatures. So
Yeah, I love how you brought that competency number two into it to just for the folks that need to hear it as well. How are you taking a stand, right? I love that, and I will say this: there are some that could hear that type of information, and maybe the inclination is to shame or guilt or to criticize those who are leaving. And I often say that until we are in individual shoes, we really should reserve that criticism for a time where we are much more educated on that direct lived experience, because we all have to decide for ourselves what kind of emotional capital we have and how we
yeah.
best can have impact that we're seeking. And sometimes that may mean shifting from that official role but then doing the work in another way. And so I'm glad that you amplified that, because I think it's important for this community to hear that. Yes, and even if it means having to reimagine how the work is done,
Yeah.
if the title has to change and go away, just still stay focused on the work. And so I'm so glad to hear you say, I'm actually encouraged to hear you say that from your vantage point, your experience has been that even with the changes, the commitment of those that were really sold out for the purpose and the intent of equity and inclusion, they haven't wavered on that.
Yeah.
They haven't
Yeah.
wavered on that. And I think that that's important for us to hear, especially in those challenging states. And by the way, I'm not picking on those states. I know I said bless you, but here's the thing: there's so many other states that are just right in line behind the ones
Yeah.
that were named, and we know that.
Exactly.
And so
Yeah.
if we're thinking, I'm cool, I'm not in that state, I'm so glad. I want you to rethink that, because what happens in any of those states certainly have the impact to dictate what could happen in other states. And so we can't
Mhm.
close our eyes to it and assume that we can not play a role in being a part of the solution. So thank you so much for sharing all of that. Okay, so I'm not seeing any hands raised so far. Maybe people are still kind of thinking about what kind of curiosities they have, which is totally fine, because I have more questions for you, Dr. Mary, and I'm going to keep it rolling. I'm just going to keep
Okay.
it rolling. So this is a question that I'm just curious about, and I would imagine that with all of your scholarship, you may have a sense of this. So this equity role, right, within K through 12 has not always existed. I mean, we know that DEI has not always existed. But I
Right.
am
Right.
curious about your knowledge of when did it find its way into K through 12? And are you seeing that there's still, because I would imagine that there are, but there's still a large percentage of school districts that do not have this role and this function. And
Mhm.
so what from your knowledge do you know is being done maybe to help foster greater intentionality around bringing that type of function and role to the school systems, K through 12?
Yeah, yeah. It's actually surprising actually how early it started. So actually the initial ones, obviously it started obviously in the federal government first and kind of moved to
Yeah.
your healthcare and for-profit spaces. But the earliest ones that I have learned about has been actually during the desegregation and busing in Boston, right? And
Mhm.
kind of and those and around those spaces where obviously it's very clear there was a need for us to be able to
Right.
have direct support and conversation and working with different communities. And so that is when you started seeing those roles in the K-12 space. So during
Okay.
right after, and during that time.
Integration. Yeah.
Yeah. And it obviously exploded in 2020. And so now you have the space then I think it's probably out of the top largest, maybe like top 50 largest districts, about over 80% of them do have a designated equity officer role.
Got
Um,
it. Got it.
So what you have seen though is that for majority of those roles, when so they were usually positioned to report directly to the superintendent or CEO, whatever title that top person
Mhm.
used. We've seen recently that there's been a lot of reorganizations where that role is not now is kind of been lowered or minimized. So they're now being placed in HR or over in teaching and learning. So they don't have they
Yeah.
may have like a dotted line to the superintendent, but they don't have a direct line to the superintendent. And I think
Yeah.
that has also caused a lot of folks to exit when they are seeing that shift in kind of prioritizing where they sit. They say, okay, I see that you're not as committed to this work as, the prior, a lot of times also the superintendent and equity officer, when the superintendent leaves, the equity officer leaves. Like that has been
Mhm.
also a lot of trends that have happened is one exits right after the other one. So that's
Yeah.
kind of where what I'm noticing in regards to the work. So it's always been around. It's been around for a while. It's just a matter of kind of how it exploded in
Exactly.
2020. Yeah.
I see. No, that's really interesting. And the parallel here is, we see the same, of course, in nonprofits and for-profit organizations where the role where it may have been reporting directly into the CEO, now maybe it's a CHRO or it's a different department head. And there's so many different philosophies. And I will save mine for today, but there's so many different thoughts and criticism about the how that really can compromise the work.
Yeah.
But yeah, so it's interesting to me that you're seeing the same parallels within, the school system.
Yeah.
So you have a newsletter, a Substack newsletter, and I know that you are really committed to providing very rich resources, particularly to those who are on the path of being able to do this work and do it well. And so I want you to talk a little bit about how you choose your topics and how people in this community can get connected to your newsletter. So
Mhm.
share with us a little bit about that.
Yeah. So I started it it's been over a year ago. And initially just started it as a way to promote the book, right? And just kind of share different conversations. Even though I interviewed over 30 folks, and not everybody had got in the book at the final time. So I'm like, I have all this content. Let me try to share it out. So in every twice a month, I highlight a leader of the global majority. So I kind of share a bit of the interview that I did. I do a check-in, and my check-in is usually just kind of what I'm experiencing,
Yeah.
or what I'm doing in my work. And a lot of times that check-in is connected to what's happening in the world around us, right? Or what's happening in my world, and kind of giving people a little bit of a call to action, right? So as we experiencing this, what are you doing as a leader in order and your journey and kind of your expectations. And then I end with a couple of resources. So I'm a big reader. I know that I have the privilege of having time to read that others don't. So I usually try to highlight kind of a book that's in our space that people may want to be reading but can't read. So I try to give a little bit of a reader profile, a book profile, and then a couple other resources for folks to be able to connect with as well. And so for me, I try to really again understanding the fact that a lot of folks that are doing this work are very busy and would
Yeah.
love to be able to read all the stuff
Yeah.
and digest all the things, but just are not having time. And I think what resonates with people the most is actually that leader profile in it. So the feedback that I've gotten is people really appreciate hearing from other folks that are in the work and in the role and how are
Yeah.
they managing things. So that's all been the feedback so far, that people really like to see those interviews. And I make them really short. So again,
Yeah.
you can just scroll really quick on your phone to do that, to read that interview. But people, yeah, so that's something that I started, and now I really appreciate that practice, and starting kind of thinking about, okay, so what is it that I want to share, and what am I hearing also from the other leaders that I'm interacting with on a
Hey.
daily basis, and kind of bringing that all together and sharing that out in the newsletter.
Absolutely. Well, great. Well, we did share a link to your newsletter into the chat. And so we do invite our audience to check that out and share it with others as well. So you've had so much extensive research, Dr. Mary. I know that you interviewed over 30 equity officers as you were in K-12 education, as you were preparing for your book. And you've addressed some of the larger kind of recurring themes, but are there any other challenges that stood out to you that you think is important to socialize with our community here?
Yeah. I mean, I think the biggest one is support and resources, and right. And I think that again, the way that they're set up in our space, and I'm sure it's set up in other spaces, where you are the kind of the you are the department, right? And
Yeah.
so a lot of times, folks in this role don't have teams, and don't have like a separate budget that they're working with in order to be able to kind of do the work that they're
Once again, so much parallel. A lot of things do not change. As unfortunate as it is. Yes, continue,
right?
please.
Right, exactly. And so it's just like, I'm like, so a lot of folks come and say, like, I'm being set up to fail, right? Like,
Yeah.
basically, right? So I think for them it is the challenge, like, so how do I make the best use of what I have and what I have access to, right? And so a lot of times I have the fortune to coach a lot of equity officers and just kind of helping them think through what are the relationships that I need to cultivate in order to be able to then build I may not have my own team, but let me try to like pull from different places, to be able to help to tap into other folks that are interested in doing this work, that are willing to be supportive, and then also tap into other and be creative and unique in regards to how they also find funding streams. So a lot of our
Yeah,
folks are really thinking about and pulling from grants and other type of funds in order to be able to be able to do the work, because recognize the fact that they cannot do it by themselves, um,
absolutely.
and they need that
Absolutely.
partnership. Yeah.
So I'm headquartered in Greenville, South Carolina, and I know that we are seeing in this market a lot of other entities outside of the education sector that are getting involved and helping to solve for some of these issues, particularly as it relates to support and funding. Our United Way of Greenville County is really involved, and they have helped to develop special programming like On Track, because we can't just think about the education aspect. We have to think about the holistic, all of the other things, all of these
Mhm.
other determinants that could be impacting a child's ability to learn or not learn. And it reminds me of a time that I was facilitating a session for a group of folks that are in education, whether it's the classroom or just administration. And there was a really heartbreaking story of a teacher that was expressing her appreciation for just being exposed to the information, because she said, we'll call him little Johnny. She was mentioning a student in her class that she says, I feel like I'm going to have to fail him. It was a little black boy. And she said, and this was a white teacher, a white woman teacher, but she said that she finally just got fed up, and she called and she said, I've been trying and trying and trying. I'm finally glad that I got you, mom. She says, I need to understand what's going on. Little Johnny's not turning his homework. He's not engaged, this and that. And she said the mom just sat in silence and then finally said, what you need to know is that little Johnny did not turn in his work or his project yesterday, or maybe the day before or the day before. She said, because last night he took his younger sister, baby sister, out of her room and ran her over to the neighbor so that they can seek shelter and safety, because my husband was beating on me.
Oh
And she
God.
said, in that moment, she was just crippled with all types of emotions, rage,
Mhm. Right.
hurt, right? And care and concern. And she said, I don't know what to do with that. I am a
Mm.
teacher. I was equipped to go in and do the instructional design and to reach
Right.
kids, but I don't know what to do with that. And so I think that I share that story because I do want all of us who are part of this community and listening to the conversations today to realize that when we have roles of like people that are thinking about equity, they are considering all of the other holistic needs
Right.
of our kids in the education system, right? And so if they aren't well resourced, they can't provide the resources to the teachers who are actually directly impacting the students, our kids, right?
Exactly.
Future.
Exactly.
And so I'm always just reminded of stories like that when I am able to connect with people like yourself, Dr. Mary, who are on the ground doing this type of work, helping to be an advocate, provide the resources, helping others to be able to navigate how to do this when I'm not well resourced, but I have the heart and the passion. And I know that I have the voice to be an influence in some capacities, and that is carrying that carries some weight, and that is
Mhm,
important work. And so
mhm.
anyway, I wanted to bring that to today's conversation. What keeps you motivated? As I think about that story, what keeps you motivated? Because I'm sure you hear stories like this all the time. But what
Yeah.
keeps you motivated at this work, Dr. Mary?
Yeah, I mean, I'm obviously, stories like that keep me motivated, right? I think, talking to leaders who, despite all of the kind of the noise that they're experiencing, that they're keeping going, right? So like, they're continuing to say, this is my fight, this is the work. And so I can't say, oh, I'm tired, because they're, I need to be in support of them. I mean, I think, and lastly, like, this is personal. Like, I have a 12th grade girl, I have a son in third grade that are, both in the K to 12 system. And I see a cycle, right? And like, how am I breaking the cycle that my mom and then myself have experienced in education, so that they are able to have a very different experience
Yeah.
that my mom had. So I think that's always is what keeps me going. And when I hear my daughter talk, um she's super opinionated. I don't know where she got that from, but she's got lots of opinions, and is really, and just is so human centered, and just it has. I think that is also what helps me hear her and hear her friends, how they are speaking and how they want to see the world. It's a very different conversation that I had when I was 17, right? And so I think
Right.
that's also what keeps me going, is that our next generation are they're something else, right? They have all the opinions, they have all this such strong belief, right?
Yes.
And they are not interested in just following the status quo. They want something completely different, and they're willing to
Absolutely.
say and do whatever it needs to be done in order to make that happen. So I think that's definitely keeps me going as well.
That is so true. That's so right. Our young people are definitely are teaching us things, and we need to be paying
Yes.
attention, right?
Yes.
Absolutely. Well, we only have a few minutes left, and I want to certainly give you time and space to close this out in whatever way that feels appropriate. But before I get you to do that, how have you been encouraging others in the education space to navigate the challenge of how certain resources and books and content is being banned and not able to be leveraged for the education process? How have you been? What kind of conversations are you having around that?
Yeah, I mean, I think a lot of it again is, we have to be very strategic, right, about kind of how we're doing this work. And I think that's why this that coalition competencies is so important. So, you see in Florida how a lot of churches, Black churches, are now teaching Black history, right?
Right,
And so
right.
you see like all these different other different avenues that are lifting up and continuing the work that within the case system can't happen. And so I think it is the responsibility of the equity officer to make that connection, right? And so, and which I think is a beautiful part, is that most equity officers have already done that. That has been part of their
Yeah,
practice, to bring the community in. And so that as long as they're keeping those connections, so that they can then go to a family and say, we can't do this, but you can go here and get the same thing, right? Or you
right.
can go over here. And then also just a matter of like, how do we keep it going in a different way and in a different space? And so I think that has been, how do I keep the work going? I may have to say it differently. May have to not use that language. I mean, I can't say equity, but I can say that all kids need this work. And who's going to argue with the fact of all students needing what they need, getting what they need? And so I think that has been a big way of helping people really think strategically about how they keep going and doing it in community.
Yeah, I have a higher learning institution client that has also changed their nomenclature. They no longer use diversity, equity, and inclusion. Now it's the Office of Opportunity and Access. And so we're seeing a lot of that happening across the board. So, what have I not asked you about today, Dr. Mary, as you close this out, that you're feeling a lot of energy around, and perhaps you just want to amplify or socialize to this community? Let us know.
Yeah, I mean, I think the last piece I would say, well, I would just emphasize the fact that do not try to do this alone,
Yeah.
right? Like this work should be done in community, and if you don't have your people, you need to find your people. I can help you find your people, right? So make sure that you are connected to others. And I think the other side of it is that also pushing the system, right? So we are we are in this inequitable system, but the system does have to change, right? And so
Yeah.
how are you also ensuring that you're not getting distracted by window dressing
Mhm.
changes, but actually doing the work that is going to get into the water of our systems. And so I think that's always a big piece. And the last thing that I always leave myself, I always wake up every morning ensuring like, what more can I do today? Right. So
Yeah.
thinking about what more I can do today. And if I'm not, if I'm making a decision and I don't feel a little bit of discomfort in my belly, that means I'm probably making a decision that's comfortable for me. And it's not actually going to do what needs to be done for the kids that we're here to serve. So
That is such a beautiful way to end. It's about challenging ourselves to think intently about what more can we do, and not just what more can we do way down the road. What more can we do today? Let's let that impact be felt immediately. That is so beautiful. Thank you so much for leaving us with those words and all of the other nuggets that you shared today as well. We're really grateful, Dr. Mary, and we have shared all of your information. I do encourage this community to reach out, follow Dr. Mary, become a part of her newsletter subscription list, and get her book. And I'm wishing you all a healthy and safe weekend. Hopefully, we'll see you back here again next Friday for another issue of Intentional Conversations podcast. Take care.
thank you so much.